After Michael McGreevy's nice performance on Monday night in Colorado, there's no way they'll send him back to the minors again, right? We'll talk about it coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. It is Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025, and we're coming off the heels of that Cardinals win on Monday night out in Denver. Good performance by Michael McGreevy for the Redbirds, and it was the type of outing that makes you go, what in the heck have they been doing with him over the last month or so? Maybe for some it would be over the course of the whole season. Why hasn't he just been here? Because he was very effective. 7 innings, 2 runs allowed. Was not a big strikeout guy for the Cardinals last night. Just had the 1K, but he didn't walk anybody, and that is a valuable trait. It's one that we've seen Erick Fedde really struggle with recently for St. Louis. He'll be on the bump Tuesday night. Cardinals are probably going to have to carry it with the bats, which I think they can do, against Bradley Blaylock, the right-handed pitcher who is scheduled to throw for Colorado. He has a 9.97 ERA this year. Look, Erick Fedde, just get you through 5. You can give up 3-4 runs. That should still be more than enough. The Cardinals, again, have got to sweep the Colorado series, or what are we doing here? What are we talking about if they can't figure out a way to do that? But I wanted to talk for a little bit with you about Michael McGreevy. I do apologize for this podcast coming out so late in the day, and it is going to be an abbreviated one. I was wondering if I would even be able to fit it in, but I thought, the McGreevy thoughts are too important to just skip a day. But if you do enjoy my content and you're like, man, I wish this was a longer podcast. It was a great show on Tuesday morning, the Randy Carricker show on STL Sports Central, about 90 minutes talking about all things Cardinals, all things trade deadline. So tune into that if you're wishing for a little bit more of a B-Schaeff Daily type of show today. I've got that to offer you, as well as my conversation with Mike Claiborne on STL Sports Central that I just wrapped up a few minutes ago before I started recording this. But my stance is quite simple. Michael McGreevy will not go back down to the minors. He can't. I mean, there's just no way that the Cardinals can send him back after what we saw from him last night. 2 runs allowed. Only one of those runs were earned. 7 innings, 3.49 is the ERA now for Michael McGreevy this season with St. Louis. He has been everything that you could hope for him to be. And if you're a serious team about contending, okay, Michael McGreevy's your best option. If you're a serious team about selling and building for the future, okay, Michael McGreevy is your best option. There is no realm in which Michael McGreevy should be making another start at AAA Memphis this year. It is bananas. I feel like we've been gaslit into oblivion by this idea that the status quo and it's normal what the Cardinals have done with their rotation in the month of July. It's not normal. It's not defensible. It's a crime that Erick Fedde's trade value has dominated the conversation of how the Cardinals are handling their rotation in the month of July. Because this idea that you're going to suddenly get a bunch for him if he throws a couple of capable outings is ludicrous. But as I will continue to say, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, what you potentially gain in Erick Fedde building a little bit of trade value is that instead of DFAing him and having him not be claimed on waivers by another team who would then owe his contract, you have a chance to maybe get somebody that you trade him to pick up a little bit of the money. That's really all you're looking to get. Yes, technically you could get a prospect in return. I just don't see it. It's not realistic. I think it's something that the Cardinals can sell to the fan base and say, hey, we're trying to build up his trade value, when really the functional difference is you might get some cost savings out of the deal. If he proves himself to be a worthy flyer for another team to pick up, maybe they'll pay down some of his contract so the Cardinals won't be on the hook for the money. That's the best I can figure as to why this Erick Fedde thing has been allowed to continue. That being said, I'm not anti-Erick Fedde. I was very much in the camp for the first few months of the season that the Cardinals were handling him and Miles Mikolas exactly perfectly right. They didn't have the depth in the minor leagues to send those guys off into the sunset and replace them. Michael McGreevy was the one name that they had, and as I've said all season long, he'll get at least 12 or 13 appearances for the Cardinals this year, and that's still going to happen. But they waited it out because if they had experienced some pitching injuries, which somehow were 4 months into the season and they haven't had one pitching injury to their rotation in the big leagues, it would be looking a lot different. You would have really been concerned about the lack of depth from below. The fact that in the minors you have experienced a ton of injuries. Right now, Tekoa Roby's on the injured list. Tink Hentz has not been able to stay healthy. He's on the IL. I would not be surprised if Quinn Matthews ends up on the injured list again. because he's having a drop in velocity and you're just not exactly sure what's going on there. Hopefully, physically, everything is fine for Quinn Matthews. But realistically, none of those guys are there waiting in the wings to be able to aid a rotation right now if you end up with a couple of injuries. So it makes sense that the Cardinals waited until about halfway through the year. And then, you know what? They were also getting performances from Michaelis and Fedde that were giving them a chance, and it was keeping them in games. And their ERAs were in the high 3s or low 4s, and you could live with those production values from your number 4, your number 5 starter. No doubt about it. However, it's fallen off a cliff since then, and the Cardinals have week after week continued to put Erick Fedde back out there. And like I said, to me, the reason you do it is you're hoping you might save a few bucks. Maybe you recoup a prospect. And, like, it's valid. You could say, well, Paul DeJong was traded for Matt Swanson a few years ago, and you know what? Matt Swanson, they didn't really think of him as a prospect, but he's helped out the Cardinals and pitched for them this year. So it's worthwhile to go try to pursue a prospect like that, even if it's not a big name. Totally agree. But the difference was in 2023, the Cardinals were 13 games below 500 when they held on to Paul DeJong, and instead of just releasing him and calling it a day, they waited till the very last minute. They found a taker at the deadline, and they got a little something for him, and I think they got some of the money off the books. This Cardinals team has not been in that situation. They've been above 500 by 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 games for the majority of the month of July, and then they tail off to where they're 2 games above. They win yesterday, now they're 3 games up. By allowing the notion of a player with very little trade value and the notion that you could rebuild that trade value by continuing to run him out there, by allowing that to dominate the conversation and the decision-making process for the team, you have almost played yourselves out of, not with the Erick Fedde thing alone, but in general, you've played yourselves out of playoff contention to where now you probably should be sellers. And that's the disappointing part to me. It didn't have to be this way. I'm not saying that McGreevy instead of Fedde for his last 3-4 starts would have made a massive difference. But if even 2 of those games are swung to Cardinal victories because every time McGreevy comes up, he just seems to put on his game face and a bulldog mentality and go out there and give you length and save your bullpen, which has carry down effects in the following days. You can't tell me that July the 6th, when they allowed Erick Fedde to pitch at Wrigley Field in Chicago, and he only goes 4 outs in that game, that doesn't have a carry down effect on your bullpen in the days that follow. You know, it's just a reality of the situation that they've lost additional games because of the way they've handled their rotation in the month of July. So now, sure, it's like, well, you know, we might as well let Erick Fedde pitch on Tuesday. Well, by all means, have him pitch tonight. You're using McGreevy. You made a savvy decision in letting Liberatore get some extra rest. Totally good with that. You want to keep his long-term prospects as strong as you can as well. But it is very interesting to me that we've almost come full circle from, really, I mean, Fedde's going to go out there and you're probably not going to win. Yeah, we know, but we're going to try to rebuild his trade value when there wasn't much to be had from that in the first place because the teams you're trading with aren't dumb. They're able to access his games and his game logs and his video of how he's performing right now to know that they're probably not too interested in paying up for Erick Fedde. But the Cardinals have allowed that to almost drive the bus in terms of the way that they've handled this month, and it's caused them really to fall out of the race. So I am still of the opinion, I know many in Cardinal Nation for commenters and things that I've heard from this week are of the stance that, you know what, the Cardinals should already be in sell mode. I don't care what happens this week. I am still of the opinion you sweep the Rockies. That is the bare minimum. You sweep them because they are terrible. They're on pace to win only 39 games this year. So you don't become, as Claiborne mentioned on our podcast just a minute ago, he said they've won 24 games. You're not going to become the 25th. The Cardinals cannot lose a game to the Rockies this week, period, the end. If they do, there should be no angst or consternation whatsoever about trading away Ryan Helsley, Phil Maton, and probably Steven Matz for whatever you can get for him. I would allow room for Matz to stay and say that that's something the Cardinals should do because he could always slide back into the rotation if you got desperate due to injury. But for sure, Maton and Helsley, I think you get what you can for those guys. And look, you call up Ryan Fernandez or Chris Roycroft or Matt Swanson, or if Graceffel's already up. If Andre Granillo gets healthy, I am not. It's hard to position what I've been saying on this topic today because I mentioned it to Claibs and he was kind of like, well, no, there's a big difference between Helsley, Maton, and then just throwing in some minor league guys and hoping that you don't lose production. Totally get that, but find me a position on the diamond where you can get away with it more easily than relief pitcher. Because it's a fickle nature of a position. guys that are great one year aren't the next. Look at Ryan Helsley, who was just the best reliever in baseball last year. This year, he's been more average. His fastball's getting hit around. He's given up at least a base runner every time he pitches. You can get away with, well, what if Riley O'Brien happens to have a great 2 months because he's got really good stuff and he goes on a roll? Okay, you can get away with him and JoJo as your 8th and 9th, and you maybe didn't actually lose a whole lot compared to what you had before. What if Ryan Fernandez pitches more like he did last year instead of like he did this year, and he's been working on things in the minors? What if you get the productivity from him that can somewhat replicate Maton? Or maybe it's Roycroft that gives you that, where it's Swanson. Instead of pitching him in only those, low leverage scenarios, you bring him into some more leverage spots, and maybe he surprises you. I'm not saying the Cardinals will win more games after trading Helsley and Maton, but I am saying that that's the one position on your roster that you might be able to get away with it and not notice a drastic drop-off compared to if you had an everyday player that was hitting in the middle of your lineup and you said, hey, we're trading this guy away, we're going to sell at the deadline. Well, in that case, you're going to have to rely upon the next guy that comes in, and he's going to bat 4 times in a game and play defense for you for 9 innings. You can get away with it with a relief pitcher. And you know what? If you can't, at the end of the day, they're probably not making the playoffs even if they do hold on to those guys, because they've spent all the month of July prioritizing Erick Fedde's trade value instead of trying to win as many baseball games as possible. Because if you were trying to win as many games as possible in the month of July, McGreevy would have made every Fedde start. It's just a matter of fact. So I don't know what they're going to do moving forward. It's going to be obviously somewhat dependent on what we get from Erick Fedde on Tuesday night. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he pitches a gem and somebody says, oh, well, he beat the worst team in baseball history and he shut him out for 6 innings, so we'll trade for him now. Maybe that happens. John Mozeliak obviously knows more than I do, should know more than I do, and so maybe that pans out to the Cardinals' favor. But either way, McGreevy should be starting the next turn through the rotation. He's not going to be optioned back to Memphis. You just can't do it at this point because the obvious is hitting you square in the head of the production that he's been able to give you in the rotation this year with a 3.5 ERA. And look, he struck out one guy last night. I'm not suggesting that he is going to be an ace, but dude, he brings it. And Oli Marmol knows he brings it. And Wilson Contreras can see that he brings it. If you read some of the comments from those guys yesterday, it's very clear to everybody. Hopefully that now includes the front office. And Michael McGreevy just has to stay. How they figure it out around that is not my problem. That is the problem of John Mozeliak, potentially Erick Fedde, potentially Miles Michaelis, potentially Matthew Liberatore. Like if the answer is no, actually this skipped start for Libby, it's a little bit deeper than that, and we're going to have to send him to the IL to get him some additional rest or recuperation for something, then fine. Maybe Erick Fedde is spared, and that's the way that goes down. But McGreevy's pitching. That's all I know for sure. And I believe that John Mozeliak will get that right, by the way. They're not going to send McGreevy down again. They could. I've seen it talked about that you can only option a pitcher 5 times, and then the 6th time he would be subject to waivers. McGreevy, as of today, you can count on this, he's only been optioned 4 times. The 5th time that people are throwing around is a time that was when he was the 27th man for a doubleheader. That doesn't count against the 5 options. So they could option him and bring him back up one more time. They won't do that, in my opinion. He is going to be in the rotation the rest of the way as long as he is healthy. And if I'm wrong, well, you can come make fun of me in the YouTube comments. Hit subscribe to this channel. Make sure you're following. We have a lot of Cardinals content coming up between now and the trade deadline. This had to be a shorter episode because it's the 3rd show that I've done today, and I've got another show to go at 4 p.m. in Columbia, Missouri on KTGR. So appreciate you guys bearing with me, but those are my McGreevy thoughts. Tell me yours right here in the comment section below. That's going to do it for this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Appreciate you guys as always, and we'll talk to you next time on b-schaeff Daily. Peace.